Hi, folks. Welcome to episode 170 of the Wealth on Any Income podcast. This is where we talk about money tips, techniques, attitudes, information, and provide inspiration around your business and your money. I'm your host, Rennie Gabriel. In past episodes, we spoke about how to understand the numbers from your business, how to measure the level of pleasure based on where you spend your money, how to track your money in 5 to 10 seconds, what determines how close you are to complete financial choice, and how to run your business without being in your business. Last time, we had Brian T. Sebastian, who has 66 million views and counting for his media company. Today, we have as our guest, John David Graham. John has gone from homelessness to business owner to published author. At 53, he founded Good Samaritan Home, a nonprofit helping people restart their lives after prison. At 61, he finished his doctorate, and at 75, he published his debut novel, Running as Fast as I Can. He believes it's never too late to change your life, as long as you keep trying, and his novel has already garnered 5 awards for inspirational fiction. John, welcome to the Wealth on Any Income podcast.
Glad to be here. Very glad.
Terrific. Well, let's start with some questions. Tell me more about the work that you do and why you do it.
We started Good Samaritan Home initially. Well, let me give you some background. It might help.
Okay.
I was a door-to-door salesman, a children's home counselor, a substitute school teacher, a truck driver, fireman, building contractor, a minister, and a journalist. And I had moved 12 times with my family, and it was a very difficult structure for them. And finally, at 53, because I could not find where I fit, at 53, I said to my wife, who stuck with me through it all, by the way, I may add, that we just need to do something that is more in the heart instead of trying to look for something that is financially feasible. So what we did was we bought the oldest house in town that needed lots of work because my construction background, I knew I could do it. I said, I'll have it remodeled in 3 months. And 14 years later, we're still doing that, by the way. Optimism has never been a problem for me. But what we did was we said, we're going to open this up to people who have come to our door for help. And we're going to start a shelter. And we're going to use our own home. And we started off like that. But then the Department of Corrections said, we have some homeless people who are low risk, but if they just had a place to stay, then they could get back on their feet and do the first steps in rehabilitation. So we started contracting with the Department of Correction, and sharing a bedroom in our house led to another house, another house, and another house. And we formally had started Good Samaritan Home as a legal nonprofit. And over the years, since I was 53, by the way, just now finding what I felt to be my comfort zone. And over the years now, it's been 22 years, we have gotten 20 houses and 10 staff members, and we have helped more than 2,500 men and women restart their lives.
That's so wonderful. I mean, I applaud you for that, because one of the requirements to be a guest on the show is that you're giving back in some way, whether you're donating money, whether you're cleaning beaches, whether you're providing a restart for people who are coming out of prison like you're doing. That's one of the requirements for being on the show, because a lot of the people who know about my story know that I started over at age 50 after a couple of divorces and a business failure from broke. But 8 years later, I no longer had to work for a living. And so at this point, the only reason for my working is I donate 100% of the profits from my books, from my programs, from my coaching to various animal and veteran charities. So there's an alignment between you and I.
I sensed that when I first saw your broadcast. So, and particularly in this culture, ever since about 95, when everything was consumed with finances and making money, and we went the opposite direction, and which makes you a bit of an odd man out. But your broadcast is wealth at any income. And that, to me, if you really parse that, it makes a great deal of emotional sense, because you can be wealthy. Well, the first 5 years with Good Samaritan Home, we did not have a dime of income. My wife had to work at McDonald's to support us. And it wasn't until probably 10 or 15 years in that we actually made a decent income, affordable living income from Good Samaritan Home.
Yeah.
And that doesn't count all the work we had to do.
Yeah, I get it. I completely understand. And like I said, there's an alignment between the two of us. But tell me, so, well, I got a good idea because you already talked about who you're supporting. So I'm guessing that the Good Samaritan Home works primarily with men, but also women. Are they a part of your target market?
Well, our often statement has always been, what is the need in the community?
Mm-hmm.
And then we say, how do we adapt to meet that need? So we were asked, can you help with this problem? So we started the shelter, and then we started the reentry houses. But we kept getting calls saying, I have a woman who has who needs housing. But statistically, there's not a great need for women in housing. Now, my thinking is that women always can find somebody to take them in because they appear less threatening than men, although drugs have changed everything.
Yeah.
But but statewide, there was only maybe, we're located in Ohio, but statewide, there was only, I believe, 2 houses for women total.
In the entire state?
Entire state, because there wasn't the need. Now, I'm talking about a private reentry housing, not necessarily state housing.
Yeah, I understand.
So, what we did was we started one house, and we worked primarily with the local court. And I would say since in the past 10 years, we've had referrals from the local court to help local women who need temporary housing. So out of 20 houses, we have 1 for women.
Okay. So here's what it sounds like you told me. You've had a lot of career challenges.
You're being kind.
Yes. Yeah, I've learned how to do that. And
my motto has been, I've been thrown out of better bars than this one.
okay. Well, so obviously you've gained some insights from that. And would you say that that has been what has allowed you to have the success that you're having at this stage of life?
I've never been arrested. I've never been in prison. But to a degree, I can identify with our residents, because invariably, if you talk to them, they'll say, you ask them, where was your mother? Where was your father? And there's nobody there. And what were you expected to do? Well, I don't know. We just got through. We just got by. I was alone, or my grandma raised me. And to a degree, I can identify with that, because when I was growing up, it was in the what they call the mill suburbs of Pittsburgh, and we just existed together. There was no structure in our family, no expectation for education. I call it living alone together. So when I graduated high school, I just went off to college on my own, not having any direction, but I just wanted to get out of home. And when I graduated college, I had no idea what I wanted to do with it. I had no structure to teach me. And so I spent the next 30 years bouncing around saying, what do I want to do? And I was overeducated, but underqualified. And I had no one to help me. And historically, we've always had structures like clubs or groups or churches, but we're finding less and less of that. And people are growing up alone, and they have nowhere to go. So they go to the streets, and they survive in any way possible. So in some homes, what I've learned is some homes have an expectation of success. They expect you to go to college, to become a lawyer, to become a doctor, become a teacher, a professional. They expect you to find someone who will stay with you as a spouse. They expect you to be a father or a mother. But in the homes that we deal with, and in my home, you weren't given any of that. So in the Black community, they call that white privilege, where you're taught things naturally.
Yes.
And I call this an expectation for success in all communities.
Yeah.
Not given to wasn't to me, and it's not to the people we deal with.
That is so clear to me what you're speaking about. When I look back at my own situation, while I had parents at home, while I had parents, they weren't necessarily at home because they were working to survive. And I remember coming home from elementary school, 5, 6 years of age. I was a latchkey child.
Right.
There may have been food on the table, but again, there was no direction. There was no idea of what was expected of me. And I realized, I don't even know where it came from, but I provided that to my children, what was expected of them. They were expected to go to college. They had no idea that anything else was an alternative. My daughter became an attorney, and my son is a chartered financial analyst. But the idea when they were growing up was, I went to college, you will go to college, period.
Right.
So
part of the issue, I think, happened after World War II and the Depression. Our parents came home and they said, I want to provide for my family.
yes,
So they provided the financial structure.
yes,
It wasn't poverty, but they weren't there.
right.
And so we grew up without that family structure. And it's 10 times worse in many of the minority groups, because without marriage and without structure, and with the divorce rate running 50% now, it's much, much harder on children to grow up in a family that's separate like that. So I've come to believe very, very strongly in second and third and fourth chances. I've needed 8 chances, but we're not counting.
Well, let me ask you this. Is there a valuable free resource that people listening to the podcast or watching it on YouTube can go to and get some additional support for what you're doing?
Well, obviously, if you're interested, you can go to goodsamaritanhome.org, which is our website.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe one thing there was a lot of blowback when we started our work in this small town. It was mostly a rural white community outside of Dayton, Ohio.
Mm.
And everybody thought that when you bring in felons, you're going to be bringing in Black people from the city.
Yeah.
And it wasn't true, of course, because the same issues in the white community are in the Black community. I've found that poverty and crime and drugs in particular have no respect for skin color. And so what happened was there was a lot of blowback. There were petitions filed, there were lawsuits filed, there were threats. It was about 7 years of very hard times. And what I've learned through it all is that when you keep focused on the prize and your goal is very clear in your head, so you try to explain it to others and they don't hear your statistics. So what I decided to do was, how do I tell a second chance story so that people will understand the emotions of giving a second chance, of what we're talking about? And that's where the novel came from, Running as Fast as I Can. It's not a memoir. It's a fictionalized story of a boy who grew up in the situations that we're describing, who grew up and didn't have the tools. And there was poverty, there was physical abuse, there was sexual abuse. And he spent his entire life running to catch up to everyone else who seemed to be normal. Now, what I would recommend, if somebody would like to know the emotional story of second chances, then I would look at that book.
Oh, that sounds terrific. That sounds like, oh, well, no wonder you've been winning awards for this as fictionalized, inspiration. And
I didn't intend to be file it as inspirational fiction, but it was awarded that way after reading it. So I was taken aback by that, but it makes sense because it's a rags to riches emotionally. And right now, in particular, it seems like here, good example. I was at the airport in Dallas yesterday, and a woman saw me working on my. I was doing some editing, and she said, "Are you a writer?" I said, "Well, I am. I'm editing the audiobook now." And so we were talking, and I said, "If you want some free chapters, you can go to the website and Amazon and download it and just read a little bit. Tell me your thoughts."
mm,
So we're sitting in the airport, and she's on her phone reading the introduction, the first 20 or 30 pages. And she walks over later and says, "I couldn't put it down."
mm-hmm.
And so she downloaded the book from Amazon right there. And that's the reaction I want, because it was a story emotionally of what we're talking about.
That's beautiful, John. That makes me feel warm inside. So thank you. What would be your best advice for someone who wants to start over late in their career or late in their life?
Probably what was most important to me was what I was lacking was getting someone I could trust to say, how can help me through this? Because through my life, when I was at my worst point, there would be someone, and for me, it was often a male because I didn't have a man, someone who said, "Let me help you through this. Let me give you feedback." So I would suggest that making connections, because there's a tendency for hurting people to stay alone until they feel better. And we don't go to church until we feel better. We don't go to tell people that we're hurting until we get through it. But many times we can't get through it without help. So I would say reach out.
Perfect. And it reminds me of a comment that salespeople use when someone says, well, when I feel more organized, I will purchase your whatever. And it's similar to someone saying, well, I'm ill now and I'll wait to feel better before I go to the doctor, which doesn't make any sense when you think about it.
Yeah. What I would tell people is just try one more time. Just keep trying. Never quit trying, because right now, particularly, we're living in a very hostile time.
Yes.
And when I watch the news on any channel, at the end, I just feel like I just need to. I usually go off and walk 5 miles just to clear my head, because I have got to get out of this name calling and this negativity. And it makes me long for the days when Dr. King was speaking, when he would offer me hope.
Thank you, John. John, and I want to thank you for being on the Wealth on Any Income program.
It's been my pleasure. You're very good at what you do.
I did practice, so thank you. And to all of you who are still listening or watching, if you'd like to know how books, movies, and society programs you to be poor and what the cure is, then log on to wealthonanyincome.com/TEDx. You'll hear my TEDx talk and can request a free 9-step roadmap to complete financial choice and philanthropy, and receive an email once or twice a month with tips, techniques, or inspiration around your business or your money. And if you'd like to see how you can increase your wealth and donate to the causes that touch your heart, please check out our affordable program, Wealth with Purpose. To my listeners, thank you for tuning in. You can listen to the Wealth on Any Income podcast on your favorite platform, and please rate, review, and subscribe. Until next time, be prosperous. Bye-bye for now.